your unfiltered view of politics.
Senate Intelligence Committee Chair Mark Warner spoke about security challenges facing the U.S. at an event hosted by the Christian Science Monitor. Topics included election interference, foreign aid, the use of AI in elections, and border security, which Senator Warner referred to as a significant threat. This is about an hour.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Linda Feldman, Washington Bureau Chief of the Christian Science Monitor. Our guest today is Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, Chair of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. This is his fourth appearance at a Monitor breakfast. His first was back in 2004 as Governor of Virginia, and this is his third as a senator, all centered on his role in the Senate Intelligence Committee, first as ranking member and since 2021 as chair. Before going into politics, Senator Warner was a successful investor and entrepreneur in telecommunications, and so, unlike many politicians, he actually knows what it means to make payroll. But he also knows a lot about cybersecurity, AI, the various national security threats facing the U.S. and its allies. And so I'm thinking the next hour will go by very quickly. And welcome back. Now for the ground rules. We're on the record, but please no live blogging or tweeting. In short, no filing of any kind while the breakfast is underway. And then once the session ends at 10, the embargo is lifted. And as many of you know, if you'd like to ask a question, just send me a signal and I'll call on as many of you as time permits. Now, Senator Warner, if you'd like to make brief opening remarks, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Linda. It's hard to imagine this is the fourth one.
I know.
And
you're a regular.
You could not.
That's great.
When I was first here, when I was governor, I could have never, frankly, predicted that I would be here 20 years later as a national security guy. And I was a budget and education, healthcare kind of nerd, I guess. Kind of the happenstance of how I ended up on the Intel committee, because I didn't get my first committee choices when I first got in the Senate, and I didn't always get along with Harry Reid. But one of the blessings that I got was getting on the Intel committee early on, and it's been a really interesting journey. I've been lucky to have great people to work with, and proud of the fact that I think we can still claim we are the last fully functioning bipartisan committee. I guess, I know we'll get into elections, host of other things. I would say if I was looking at my kind of overarching goal at this point in this job, it is the discussion around trying to redefine national security so that it's more than who has the most tanks and guns and ships and planes. I really think technology competition, particularly with China, is probably the overarching theme that has affected most of my work over the last few years. I would point out the fact that we were the first group of individuals to point out the challenge with Huawei. John Cornyn and I did CHIPS bill. We are deeply engaged at this point in a series of other technology domains. Probably the ones that we've not fully rolled out yet are a lot of time on critical minerals, and we've got a lot of work going on there. A lot of time on an issue that 5 years ago I wouldn't have put at the top of my list, but do now. As we think about the enormous energy needs our country's going to have, particularly as we think about AI, I don't think we're going to get it with, especially if we're going to maintain clean energy without SMRs being a big piece of the solution set. And I'm spending a huge amount of time with the hyperscalers, the utility companies, DoD and others, how we get that together. And then finally a lot of time around life sciences, biomanufacturing, where I feel like, again, we've kind of taken our eye off the ball, and China's making great strides. So recognizing, having done this a few times, that you don't all hang on every word of my opening comments. You have to be polite enough to listen to the guy or gal go through their opening spiel. I'll stop there and I'll let you move to the entree, which is grilling me on subjects of your choice.
Great. Well, thank you. So you recently told the AP that the U.S. may be less prepared for election interference in this year's elections than it was 4 years ago, and then 4 years before that. And you cited improved disinformation tactics by Russia and China, the rise of domestic candidates and groups that spread disinformation, and the rise of artificial intelligence. Can the U.S.
I would add
another one?
Yes.
Okay.
That I think was critically important. Part of this was to kind of stir the pot. You know, the name of the case, it's Murtha versus Missouri.
Yes.
The case where, for basically about 6 months after the Fifth Circuit had said you can't even have voluntary communications between social media companies and the government, you know, we went de facto dark.
Right.
And that's changed, and we spent a lot of time urging DOJ to go ahead and allow some of those communications to take place. And I would just also say just the nature in 2020, because we'd gone through, you know, a fairly aggressive 2018 cycle, the folks who were the folks who were engaged in trying to protect our infrastructure, both on the inside and kind of collaboratively with the outside, was smoother working together. I think we've got good people now as well, but there was so much more focus and attention, and that would be the fourth category. Although I didn't, you know, and then did you mention AI as well, because that's the other thing, that scale and speed. Which
sure. No, and obviously we're all waiting for Murtha v. Missouri to come down and see where that will all stand. But so given all these challenges, can the U.S. security apparatus get its act together in time, and is that even doable?
Yeah, I think we have had a number of good sessions kind of on in skiffs with our and hearings from the committee. I'm feeling better. We are still waiting to kind of get the public hearing component where we'll bring in the social media platforms again. That's taking a little longer than I'd like to schedule. I don't think we're seeing, I think we may be the only committee that is actively doing this. I don't see as much action in the House, and there are other committees, obviously in the Senate, that this could touch on that I don't think it focused on. So I think it is not, you know, it's not gotten the constant attention that we had at this time in the cycle in 2020. Now, on the good news side, you know, we've just gone through the Indian elections and the EU elections, and particularly from Russia and the EU elections. I don't think we saw as much activity as we might have anticipated. Actually, in India, we did see some creative uses of AI where I think there was one Indian candidate who had a constituency that had folks with a lot of, since India's got so many languages, and he used AI to manipulate his own voice into, you know, simultaneously speaking in 4 different dialects across India. So I guess that's a forward-leaning. So you know, the other thing that I think we are thinking about is, and this is something I'm going to try to elevate in the debate, how we can potentially be more proactive on some of these entities and sites that are, you know, there's not IRA, the Prigozhin and the IRA has gone away, but there are other like-kind groups that are kind of quasi, not fully governmental in Russia, that we're seeing activities, and, you know, within the bounds of what I can say here, I think, you know, Paul Nakasone, who I'm a huge fan of, did indicate in the 2018 timeframe that we were willing to punch back. You know, how and if and when we punch back is also going to be determined a little bit by activity, and also as we get closer to the election time, it might be more useful. So I'm following this very, very closely. I do continue to be concerned that the platforms, they have all cut back, not just Twitter,
right,
but all of them have cut back on their content evaluation. And again, content evaluation, again, this is not based on government rules, this is based on their own standards. So let me clear this with you. Are they even going to adhere to the standards they say their users should adhere to? So that concerns me as well.
So what happens if, you mentioned Murphy v. Missouri, what happens if the Biden administration loses in the Supreme Court, and thus cutting into the government's ability to communicate with platforms on disinformation?
Well, I think then it becomes the wild, wild west. I mean, how do you and again, I was glad to see, I'm not a Supreme Court close monitor, but it felt like the arguments that even the most conservative judges were saying, how can it be the case that you couldn't even have voluntary communications between any large entity and the government? So I'm hopefully that's not the case. And the thing that I would be most fearful of is, we have some egregious effort, not dissimilar to what happened in 2016. And then people say, well, why didn't we get it? Well, you can't talk to the folks where this disinformation or AI tools are popping out. You can't complain after the fact. So I think the next big test of the state of play will be the British elections in a few weeks, because clearly Russia does not like the fact that the UK has been as stalwart as they have been in terms of defense of Ukraine.
All right, John Gizzi from Newsmax.
Yeah. One question.
Sure.
Or two.
Go for it.
Okay.
I've never seen a reporter worth their salt that can't figure out a way within the one-question rule to have an end.
So we don't, I know Joe Biden thinks there's rules, but there aren't on how many questions can be asked. But
I had a backup plan anyway. Senator, as a follow-up question to what you just said, 5 days before the British election are some increasingly important French elections now, in which they would have a stake. Do you expect that will be the state of play on June 30th before the British election?
Great question. My mistake for not acknowledging that. And if we go back to Macron's first election, where Russia was so actively played, literally writing checks, with to little pen camp. I've been more closely monitoring the UK, the snap elections in France. Let me get a readout, and maybe you can follow up with my office. But that's a fair question.
Okay. And of course, the positions of Madame Le Pen and the Macron's En Marche party differ sharply on Ukraine.
Although it seemed, I thought I read, and again I'm going to get way over my skis on this very quickly, that not just Macron's party, but there was some coalition of everybody kind of non-Le Pen coming together. I thought I just read, but you guys are probably around the table no more than me.
Yeah, that's the left, the gauche, Macron.
But it was more, so the left did not kind of align with Macron on this one.
Not at all. And my other question, very simply, is that on Ukraine, many House members on the Republican side came over to vote for the package, the supplemental, after seeing classified reports about brutality being committed in Ukraine, atrocities. And my question, very simply, is that do Is it possible to have a negotiated settlement between Ukraine and Russia now, given...
Let's put it like this. I believe there'll have to be negotiations at some point, but that ought to be more dictated by the Ukrainians, time and place. And, I think we sometimes forgot and didn't make clear enough that the Ukrainians in the first 2 years of this war, with American and NATO assistance, had literally eliminated or taken off the battlefield 87% of Russia's pre-existing army, or ground forces, 63% of their tanks, 32% of their armored personnel carriers, without the loss of a single American soldier or NATO soldier. Obviously, I think we, at some point, we'll have to look back and say, that being said, how has the Russian defense industrial base, they've responded much better than I think any of us could have expected, and why the sanctions were so unsuccessful. And we know the top line with India and China buying oil, but still, I think that some of our hopes on chips embargo and other things would prevent them from kind of advanced military. I'm not sure we've been that successful. But I have to tell you as well that I think there were very few, even of the Republicans who voted against Ukraine, other than kind of fealty to Donald Trump. The number of them that I know that said, well, Mark, I had to do this, but I really, support Ukraine, or the people who were part of dragging this out and then complaining about the Biden administration not sharing arms quicker. And I can tell you, at least from my firsthand experience, there was not a part of Virginia and some of the places where Trump is the most popular that I didn't talk about Ukraine everywhere I went across Virginia, and I had virtually no pushback. So I think I'm sure there are some who truly believe that America should, become isolationist and walk away from all of our alliances. But I think it is a much, much smaller percentage than was even reflected in the vote. Remember, end of the day, in both bodies, I think it was roughly 80%. Then again, it was Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan. TikTok was an important piece for me as well. But I think the kind of Trump cut and run theory of standing by our allies is not where the vast majority of the American people are at. Thank goodness.
Dave Shepardson from Reuters.
Staying on China for a second, I want to ask you two questions. One, on TikTok, as you know, it's been about 2 months since Congress passed the legislation that compels ByteDance to either divest its TikTok U.S. assets or face a ban. It doesn't look like there's been much progress to date. Do you think the American people are ready for a ban on TikTok if they don't move ahead, or will the government blink? And then secondly, on China and AI chips, the administration is considering further restrictions to prevent Chinese companies from getting access to the most sophisticated U.S. AI chips. What do you think needs to be done on that front?
Oh, sure.
What? All right, settle back into your seats for a moment. I'll try to be,
Okay.
TikTok. I wish the roughly 40% of the investors in ByteDance, which are large American PE firms, would be more willing to be forward-leaning on trying to, urge China to go ahead and, at least break off the non-Chinese portion of. Remember, because TikTok doesn't even market itself as TikTok in China. They don't, at the end of the day, have control, obviously, but I think they could lean in. These are firms that have made, a number of them, huge amounts of money in China, not just in TikTok, but in ByteDance and Alibaba and Baidu and Tencent, and the list goes on and on. I am following some of the guys and folks who've said they're going to try to make offers. I have some of the top technology experts, brand name people in this country, have thought could take, roughly 6 to 12 months to kind of recreate a similar algorithm, so you could still get a lot of the creativity that comes on TikTok. And again, there is creativity, and I have great empathy for all of the people who are make their living off of TikTok. But end of day, the law is the law, and we've got the Surgeon General yesterday saying maybe we ought to put warnings in terms of kids' mental health safety on all of these platforms. And again, I think one of the things I want to make clear is I have a beef with a lot of the other American platforms as well. The reason why TikTok is different is because ultimately, at the end of the day, the CCP, I think, will have access to that data that's scraped, and you could not create a more powerful propaganda tool. Frankly, if we took most of the entities that you all work for and combine them together, I'm not sure your full reach is 170 million Americans 90 minutes a day, especially in terms of that under 24 demographic. So I'm going to keep urging the American investors to, I think, because again, we don't want to ban TikTok. We want to simply have it not controlled by CCP. Whether the Chinese could say, hey, we're going to declare victory and claim this is a great example of a Chinese success story and let it gain independence but still be celebrated as a great Chinese tech success story. I'm not sure they will, because again, I think that reinforces the basic underlying cause. At the end of the day, the CCP sees this as a propaganda and potentially espionage tool. On the chips issue in China, a couple of things. I'm trying to be careful how I say this. One, I still believe there are, unfortunately, there may be Western chip manufacturers who are knowingly or unknowingly still having their tools and products circumventing the bans we've got in place, and that greatly concerns me, particularly if they do it knowingly. And there's some very big brands who are could fall in that category, and you all ought to go off and scour that and bring those stories to light. The other thing, and this is still a problem we've got in the intel community. Our intel community is so used to traditionally spying on, you spy on the military, you spy on the government. You don't necessarily follow all of the all the tech companies, or you don't follow where China's getting extraction of rare earth minerals, or you don't follow what in the life sciences area, BGI, the Chinese company may end up becoming the next potential Huawei. You'd think, as somebody who claims, a la Al Gore, that I invented cell phones and I could figure out how to turn mine off. But the case in point I'm talking about is, I think we, in our intel side, have missed a couple of times, like SMIC's ability to get chips under 7 nanometers, some of the efforts of tool makers. We just need to kind of continue to up our game in following what China is doing, not just in this chip space, but frankly in a lot of these other domains where we've seen no indication that China is not, pedal to the metal in terms of investing and trying again to not just be successful, but dominate some of these domains.
All right, Amy McKinnon from Foreign Policy.
Thank you, Linda. Senator, there was a lot of reporting in the wake of the rescue of the Israeli hostages from Gaza a couple of weeks ago that the U.S. played a significant role in sharing intelligence, both that contributed to the hostage rescue, but also in the months leading up. How confident are you that the intelligence that the U.S. is sharing with Israel is not being used in strikes that may violate international law? And what oversight mechanisms are there, if any, to track how that intelligence is being used by the Israelis?
Let me just say this, we are tracking that. I think the administration has indicated that particularly vis-a-vis efforts to rescue the hostages, we share intelligence. I mean, Israel has been a long-term ally. And I'll just leave it at that. We are tracking. So make sure that the concern you raised is
Have there been any instances where you are concerned that U.S. intelligence has been used in strikes that have had high civilian casualties, may have violated international law?
I'm just going to leave it. We are trying to track that process.
Rosina Sabur from The Telegraph.
Thank you. Senator, you mentioned that you're closely following the British.
Could you speak up? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you mentioned that you're closely following the British elections and you're watching for any potential Russian interference. Have you seen any evidence of that so far? Is it greater than it has been in previous elections? And why is this election particularly important?
Well, I think, one, it clearly meets Putin's plans if he can lessen the British or the Americans' resolve for supporting Ukraine. It's he could save some money on his tanks, guns, ships, and planes if he could diminish support. And I think we can generally say there is a lot of entities, both the formal Russian services and some of the kind of successors to the IRA out there. We have not seen yet we've seen preparations, but we've not seen the level of activity. Chances are, as we saw in the past, this activity, ramps up dramatically the closer it gets to the election. So the ability, particularly with deep fake tools. So, to answer specifically, we've not seen specific action that I can point to in the UK election to date.
There is broad cross-party support for Ukraine and for funding the defense of Ukraine in the UK. So I'm just wondering how you think the Russians would try to sow chaos into that. Are there particular politicians?
I think they're just generally. I'm not sure where, and I'm going to again get beyond my knowledge a little quickly. Mr. Lafarge, I'm not sure where he's at this week on that issue, whether he is continuing to follow Mr. Trump's lead.
You're talking about Nigel Farage?
Not Farage, yes.
Right.
Yes, I said Farage. I think they're sometimes just sowing discontent or trying to pit groups against each other or further social division. Is one of the tactics that Russia often uses.
Laura Kelly from The Hill, to your right.
Looking at the Biden administration's pursuit of a mega deal of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia as contributing to an end of the war in Gaza, what is your view on the progress of that deal being achieved? And is it an option to separate some of the parts of that deal, particularly the bilateral deal between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, as moving forward if some of the other pieces aren't ready to move forward yet?
Listen, I had great doubts about the change in Saudi Arabia. But I went, I'd heard lots of reports. I came away, I took a letter codel of, I think, 5 or 6 of us bipartisan in January to Saudi. And my impression was here was a country that the changes that MBS had made, particularly in terms of women being uncovered and being more active in society, were not going to be reversed. I saw also a country, obviously, pick your data point that is 50% under the age of, I heard anything from 50% under the age of 30 to 60% under 32. So definitely a very young country, and a huge amount of optimism there. And in meetings with MBS, again, I saw someone that I was I think was prepared to make the decision if we could get this defense alliance with the United States, would stop trying to play both sides against the middle. And I think that is in America's best interest. I don't know how you separate out. It's also in our interest to make sure that the war in Gaza is resolved and the ceasefire comes about, and that Saudi and the Emiratis and others play a role in the reconstruction. So I don't see how you divide this and say we're going to do this part of the deal and not do that part of the deal. I also think there is I've been very, very much up to my eyeballs in the G42 Microsoft deal with the Emiratis. And again, under the notion of trust but verify. And again, I think there is a decision by the Emiratis that if we do this, the price of doing this with American tech companies and others is going to mean you can't play us off against China on a regular basis. And I think you've really got, and I think there's again a little bit, obviously, as you know, somewhat level of rivalry between Emiratis, Saudi, Qatar, and my sense is that and from people I know in the investment world to being the first one to really dig into the G42 Microsoft deal, that these nation states have made the decision that rather than simply sending all their capital out to maximize return to their sovereign wealth funds, that these nations are really making the decision. I think Emiratis probably leading the pack, that they want to be a potential tech/AI superpower or major player, and thank goodness we're still ahead in those fields vis-a-vis China on the tech standpoint. And I think all three of the nations are, and the others are now more than paying lip service in the fact that they got to move away from a carbon fuel based economy to thinking they're going to be major tech players. I think that's good for their countries. I think it's good if we can find that alignment in terms of the group of Sunni nations across the region with a peace and treaty and recognition of Israel and some greater collaboration. I don't know how you would, on the Saudi deal in particular, chop that up without thinking of, to get the American Senate to buy off on that. It's going to have to include recognition of Israel and, again, some, I think, comprehensive approach.
Recognition, if I may just follow up, recognition of Israel I don't think seems to be the most challenging part. It seems to be the pathway towards a Palestinian.
Yeah, you've got to have well, that's one of the things that I find, I agree, I should have made that clearer. That's one of the things that I find so frustrating in terms of my visits with the Prime Minister, not even this time. I remember I was in Israel last year with Schumer and a group of senators, and the fact that the settlers are so broken up parts of the West Bank. How do you get a viable independent state the way that has been broken into a variety of zones? I mean, to get a viable two-state solution, not only do you have to deal with the war in Gaza, but you're going to have to deal with some of the settler issues as well.
All right, we've got about 20 minutes to go and a long list, so maybe try to keep these to one question going forward. Warren Strobel from the Wall Street Journal.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this. Another question on the aid to Israel. There were a couple of members of your party both in the House and Senate, that have serious and long-standing holds on specific weapon systems to Israel. Those were reversed or lifted this week. And I wouldn't ask you about individual members' decisions, but can you give us a sense of what the arguments were from the White House and the level of pressure that was put on to get that passed?
Yeah, I think I'm not on either one of the two committees that were kind of having to go through the approval process, and so I don't know the specific arguments, but I do think it's. I think there's still broad-based support for continuing to, equip Israel. The challenge is some of the earlier questions about how those arms are used. So but I support that continued aid.
Brian Bennett from Time to your left.
Yep.
Thank you, Senator. Do you want to see the Biden administration doing more to stop Iranian black market and gray market oil shipments?
Yes, but on this one, let me. You're going to get beyond my knowledge level really quickly. I think if I started to, I don't think I know enough of the specifics at this point to give you a. I'll go with just a yes, because I don't. Go ahead, follow up with something else.
I have a follow-up on the Chinese investment in U.S. companies and the technology transfer that comes with that. What would be useful for the U.S. government to do? Have you seen a lack of deterrence?
I think it's gotten much better. I mean, I remember one of the things we started. Burr and I did back in 2017. We had what we called the classified roadshows, where we would bring in industry sector after industry sector to tell them, we're not saying we ought to do full decoupling, but be at least aware. We did 14 of those before COVID timeout, but then did a few after COVID. I would quickly add pre-COVID, private equity was the one sector that didn't even sit with us. And I think, I can remember one that was actually not classified where we were in Austin. And businesses kind of going, universities going, well, if somebody's got a student visa, doesn't that mean you've checked them out? No. Or a tech entrepreneur saying, I kind of wondered why the Chinese offer was 50% more than anything else I got. I think we have cut back that dramatically. People are more sensitive. I did have one Fortune 50 CEO. I think we all kind of scratched our head at one of these sessions recently. Go, well, you don't really think she would invade Taiwan, do you? And get a grip, guy. I mean, this is you don't have to invade. A blockade alone would put change the relationship dramatically. So we're there are still things like the outbound investment that Cornyn and Casey have. And something like that I had real concerns about a few years ago. I think we're going to have to put an outbound investment review in place. I think the inbound is getting much better, and even the PE and venture firms, I think, are trying to either think twice or break off their Chinese investments from the American investment. And I think we're also finding. I think about the fact I have been on an annual basis speaking to a lot of the German businesses that come, a big group of them come, and I kind of do a dog and pony with them. And a few years back, they kind of rolled their eyes on China. More recently, they were, I think, much more concerned. And wait until President Xi, dumps millions of 15,000 euro EVs into the German market. So I think there is this China's willingness to kind of not restructure and simply continue to dump products at a cheaper basis is creating lots of willingness to re-examine relations with China. And I also think you've got a whole lot of dissatisfied customers from Belt and Road, where countries didn't get the jobs they thought China would bring in their own workforce. They had pretty crummy infrastructure, and they're still in debt. And some of the things I think as American policymakers we need to do, I try to be consistent. One is making sure you make clear your beef is with the CCP and Xi Jinping, not the Chinese people or the Chinese diaspora, but also, and I think that's just more than being politically correct, because if you don't say that on WeChat, the diaspora will constantly hear, see, this is just an all anti-Chinese rhetoric. And even some of the things when policymakers say America and the West, we piss off 2/3 of the world that I think would rather do business with us. So how we engage with the balance of Asia, how we engage with, not walking away from Africa, this all fits into this, I think, global competition with China that we need to, again, not decoupling, but a very sophisticated, eyes wide open awareness of the challenge and the threat.
Felicia Schwartz from the FT.
Hi, thank you. So it's been about more than 2 weeks since President Biden came forward and backed this ceasefire proposal that's floundering. And I guess I'm wondering, based on what you've seen and been briefed, do you believe that Hamas will ever agree to a ceasefire? And then the natural follow-up is the administration preparing at this point to pursue anything else?
Well, first of all, I think we've been really close a couple of times. Particularly that moment, and it was, we've gotten close so many times, but that moment when, this was only a blip in the news, but I think it was probably the time we were closest when Hamas, Israel's leaning, I think Hamas was ready, and there happened to be a random attack that killed three IDF soldiers, I have huge confidence in Bill Burns, and I've never seen someone work harder at this, and someone that has more trust and respect by all the parties. This might not have been the time always through this negotiation, but as of these last few weeks, it is, the blame lies with Hamas's leadership, Sinwar in particular. I think most Americans probably didn't realize, Sinwar was in Israeli jail in the first place because he killed 4 Palestinians. And that the Israeli government, he had brain cancer, and the Israeli medical system saved his life. It assures that everything I see and read is that, this is, the kind of leader who's, for the notion of the Palestinian people, but doesn't give a hoot about how many Palestinians die in this conflict. So you are asking absolutely the right question. You are,
At what point?
I know. Absolutely. I don't know how many. I'm not sure how many more days I have of saying, well, I'm still hoping it's going to, within this framework, how much of the Hamas response does the public know? I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying. Ask me again in a week that question. But you are so right. Of like, okay, if all the other players, Arab, Israeli, American, are all kind of saying this is the right framework, and we can't.
And the normalization deal that Laura asked about depends on this.
Absolutely. But if you have someone, in the case of Sinwar in particular, who is hiding in these tunnels along with some of the Hamas fighters while women and children are being killed, and he doesn't have any, seems to have very little compassion, and wants this permanent state of conflict.
Are there aspects of the Hamas response you think haven't been reported adequately? You seem to suggest.
I have not seen word for word of it, but so I know I got some of the early reports that they thought, well, it was not, we take the deal, but the modifications were small, but I don't frankly have the visibility yet. I can get that, but I don't have it.
All right, Dan Flatley from Bloomberg, to your left.
Senator, you mentioned Huawei in your opening remarks, the Chinese telecommunications company. It's been several years now since the U.S. blacklisted it here and leaned on some allies to rip and replace it in their systems, and yet it is still one of the top, if not the top, telecommunication equipment providers in the world, to the point where the Pentagon is even having trouble finding contractors who don't use it overseas to do business with. What does that say about the U.S.'s efforts to really kill Huawei, or at least seriously degrade it? Is there still more to be done? Is there something that can be done, or is it beyond hope?
Well, I think one of the things, Huawei has been pretty darn successful at moving beyond just kind of a straight telecom provider to, a data center provider. They're kind of had the whole suite of services. I think we should have earlier been frankly even more forward-leaning on why we thought there were vulnerabilities. And again, in so many of these cases, with any kind of tech company, it's not just, as you know, it's not just the vulnerability today, but if you've got any kind of system that's got a daily, weekly, monthly upgrade, all those upgrades can always be the place where you put in the problem. And I do think there are a number of nation states that wish they hadn't gone the Huawei route in Europe, frankly. It's, again, I think one of the key reasons why geopolitically doing the G42 Microsoft deal makes sense, because if you've got this combination of Emiratis with their financial resources and Microsoft, that may get us into countries where we can push out Huawei as much under the Emiratis banner as under the American banner. But you got to have, an alternative. It's one of the reasons as well why I continue to be a huge advocate for ORAN, Open Radio Access Network, because I will not nerd out here entirely, but Huawei's the traditional stack of telecom equipment, our competitors are, we don't even have an American competitor, but it's Ericsson, Nokia, and Samsung. You move away from the stack to a software-based system, and suddenly you got a whole lot of additional players. We've been slow to move fast enough on ORAN development. Matter of fact, in the CHIPS bill, we had $2 billion for kind of ORAN development. That money needs to get out a little bit quicker. But I actually feel that the recognition amongst many nations of the security vulnerabilities that Huawei poses is higher, but we've got to have an alternative. And ORAN is one. This notion of how the Emiratis with Microsoft can go into other domains, but again, doing that, you've got to trust but verify, because sometimes you're talking about, in the AI space, some of the crown jewels in terms of the algorithms, the weights on some of those models. But I actually feel better about our possibilities of pushing Huawei out over the next couple of years than I did, say, 2 years ago.
Krista Case-Bryant from The Monitor, to my left.
Thank you so much. You've done a great job pivoting. You've done the Middle East, Russia, China. I wanted to ask about something closer to home. So FBI Director Christopher Wray has mentioned to Congress a number of times in the past 6 months that he sees significant national security threat from the situation at the border, the uptick in illegal immigration. And your GOP colleagues have repeatedly amplified that, most recently last week when the news came about the arrest of the 8 Tajiks with suspected ISIS ties. So I'm just wondering, from your vantage point on the Intelligence Committee, to what extent do you think this is a significant threat, and how does it compare with other national security threats?
It is a significant threat. And I am monitoring it very, very closely, and nothing would be more devastating now than a terror threat. And again, remember I do think we leaned forward with the Russians on the Tajiks who launched the attack in the suburbs of when it was Moscow or St. Petersburg, the Moscow attack. So it's one of the reasons why I'm glad the president took the action on the Title 42 type action on the border. The border's a mess.
I mean, is it exaggerating things to say we could be seeing something like that?
We are all of the IC and law enforcement is very focused on this threat, and I'm glad to see the news item you referenced.
Okay, it's 1 minute to 10.
I can do a few more. I want to make sure everybody gets their bite, since I have given slightly senatorial answers.
So to your right, Tom Lobianco from 24 Site News.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for being here. The intelligence committees get access to a lot that many other lawmakers just don't get to see. Do you have concerns, in particular, about Representative Scott Perry, who was dubbed the general in the January 6th insurrection? Do you have concerns about him, Representative Ronnie Jackson, now having access to this special classified information?
I don't know either of those gentlemen, but I think it is telling that you've got the chair and ranking on HPSI being concerned, that you've got former Speaker McCarthy being concerned. And I want to give them, both Mike Turner and Jim Himes, a lot of credit for being, that they brought HPSI back. Of course, it used to be really easy to make the comparison that we look so much better. The fact that they've become functioning again, good for the country, but bad for our intramural competition, Senate House. But as you know, Tom, we worked on this stuff together after the Russia investigation. There is no committee that you have to take more serious than the work you do on the IC. And it concerns me, and I don't know those guys, but it concerns me that the number of senior Republicans who have said, oh my gosh, don't mess with national security. The things that we learn on our committee, sources and methods and beyond, it's to play fast and loose with that would be devastating. And again, we've got to look at the CICI committee. We range the ideological spectrum on my committee, but there is nobody. Every one of those members, I trust. Realize how important we keep that information classified. I'm not sure. You just go and look at the Republican concerns that have been raised.
Are there ways to silo this? I mean, what was that long ago when Devin Nunes was going to the White House and worked with Trump in the investigation?
And again, it's a much bigger committee in the House as well. I think I don't know how you deal with that. Normally, the way you deal with that is you put responsible members on these committees and make sure that they understand there's a responsibility. This is not a committee you go on to try to do news conferences about.
Juliana Schäuble from Der Tagesspiegel, German newspaper.
Thank you. Adding another issue on the pile, the fentanyl crisis that is not only devastating parts of this country, but also threatening to swap over to Germany, for example, other countries. Is the Biden administration doing enough? What could be done, especially also when it comes to the relationship to China, who is producing a lot of...
Well, I think the Biden administration has continues to put pressure on China about the chemicals that go into fentanyl. I think, in the Lankford toughest border bill ever, if we'd taken up that, there was also something called the Stop Fentanyl Act, because fentanyl is not, it is a complete misrepresentation that's saying that fentanyl somehow being smuggled by these people coming over claiming asylum. Fentanyl comes in through ports of entry, and you just need a much greater screening process. And we have, that would have been included in the border bill. So the hypocrisy of those who say we got to, end fentanyl, but they weren't willing to vote on that border bill is pretty stunning. And I don't think we've had both CIA, FBI, and others in the example they gave, and it just always stuck in my mind. If you take, a sugar packet, and you get 3 of these laced in an opioid, no problem. You get 5 of these, and you're dead. And it's not exactly like the drug cartels have quality control in terms of the folks, putting how many grains of fentanyl in. And we were started to wonder, even the point of just looking at it as a business, you're killing your customers. And I think whether it's Europe and others, this is a scourge. This is exponentially a greater problem than heroin, cocaine, all of the other drugs. So we got to do more on the border. I do think more pressure should be put on China, but I don't know enough of the chemical composition that if it would move from China, is it so rare, the chemicals, that you couldn't find them somewhere else? I don't know, but it was a real frustrating that we didn't get that vote on the border bill.
Okay.
I'm going to make sure I will be briefer answers.
Okay, Ian Cousins from the NewsHour to your left.
Appreciate you doing this, sir. I'm just curious, what do you think of Mike Morell's warning that the U.S. faces serious threats of a terror attack? What accounts
Say that again, who's warning?
Mike Morell.
Mike Morell.
Mike Morell, yes.
And I'm curious, what accounts for this public uptick in warnings? And, it is an election year, so I'm just curious, I'm wondering, is this political fear-mongering, or are these real?
No, I mean, it's it was important, the news item that saw 8 Tajiks arrested. If you were trying to sow discontent in this country, a terrorist incident would inflame all the internal tensions we've got in this country. I mean, I think, I have a lot of faith in Mike Morell, and, I take his warning seriously, and I'm just going to default back to my earlier answer. There's no issue I'm watching more carefully, and there is very heightened alert from both the law enforcement and the IC on this issue.
Zach Cohen from CNN to your left.
Bloomberg government, sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I have to all the time. Another issue closer to home, if I may. I saw your letter to Secretary Buttigieg about the Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport slots after these near misses at DCA. Given the fact that these long-range flights were added to the FAA reauthorization, is there really any path forward to stalling or preventing those long-distance flights from going into effect?
Well, I just will quickly say, I went, there was, this job, it's so weird where nothing happens. And then I had this great 6 days, 702 passes, TikTok, Ukraine. Then I don't even get a vote on FAA. You go from, oh my God, 2021, the gangs are back, we're going to get all this stuff going. And then, like, crying out loud, we couldn't even get a vote. Short answer is, I'm not sure. The slots were added. Not only the near misses, but you got the busiest runway in America. And you got 20% of the flights delayed more than an hour already. And I think there could have been, listen, there could have been a compromise on that. And there was a way to trade out certain slots. There were other ways to get this done. And I'm still very disappointed that we didn't let the Senate vote on this. I mean, the House assumed the same thing. The House voted and they decided not to further add slots. I mean, this is the only airport that Congress tries to micromanage, or these are the only 3 airports that Congress tries to micromanage.
Okay, one from me. Are you going to run for re-election in 26?
What? Yeah, listen, it is not. I feel I'm adding value in this job.
Yes.
I feel I've kind of got a lane around on the intel work, and particularly of the technology domains. It's still hugely bipartisan. I just recently hosted another dinner of 22 senators, very bipartisan, about how you can kind of make the Senate work a little bit more. But it's before the 2024 election.
Okay.
I'll have more, just fill in whatever normal filler politicians say.
Well, because there are suggestions that Glenn Youngkin might run against you, and I wondered what you're thinking of that.
The governor and I actually know each other socially. We are working on a bunch of projects together. I've not asked him about his political plans. He's not asked me about my political plans. But there are things like SMRs. I'm still disappointed that we've not been able to, as the author of the CHIPS bill, I've not been able to get more of the CHIPS investments in Virginia. But there's lots of time.
And there are polls showing Virginia's close in November. I mean, do you think that's really true? Could Trump win Virginia?
If Trump wins Virginia, it's going to be a landslide.
Right.
Although I think about my, Tim Kaine and I have been friends since we met at law school, and he is persistent, consistently the most optimistic person I've ever met, and I think I'm more worried about Tim's race than maybe Tim is. I'm going, Tim, what about these polls? No, I don't think, but if you can tell me how to fully predict this race, you're all doing better than me, and we can come back and, since all of our predictions, expectations of this race will probably be totally upended, in 10 days when we have the first debate?
Of course. Okay, final question, Ryan Lovelace from the Washington Times.
Senator, I heard you say back in March at the Trellick Cybersecurity Conference just down the street here that there were some quasi-allies that were looking to interfere in our election that you had evidence of or willing to share. It's been a few months. Can you say who that is or elaborate on it all? And if you can you explain why that's something that you feel comfortable putting out there, knowing the way people might try to game that to use that for the election negatively?
This is, nation states always try to kind of, find ways to influence other countries. The fact that they can, that you've got a whole new tool kit of information or tools, particularly AI tools. And for example, one of the countries that's had some has taken some actions that would, I think, fit into that definition. I'm not even 100% sure why it's still classified. So why don't you come back and ask me? You come back and ask my shop in a week. So because I'm not even sure whether there might have been even any public reporting. But again, I'm back to the question that Tom asked. If I hear something in the classified setting, until I get a green light to share that information, I'm not going to share the information. But the AI tools at speed and scale, and we think about deep fakes, but that's just one. I mean, we didn't get to AI regulation, but I thought I had this great idea that was going to finally bring everybody together, because where are the two domains where AI could really screw things up right away without even next iteration? One is faith in our public elections. The other is faith in our public markets. And, AI tools in terms of stock manipulation. I wouldn't do Fortune 100 company, but a public company, Fortune 100 to 500. The amount of ways you could mess in terms of fake product claims and other things. I've just been amazed that the investment community has not kind of raised the banner more on this. And on elections, we often think about misrepresenting a candidate, but you don't need to have that. You have somebody that looks like they're an election official tearing up a bunch of ballots. There are so many ways that we could have nefarious activities. But to the question, and I think what I was trying to make is the point that this has become so cheap and so easy. If we simply think about this, and would be a mistake to think about this as just something that China, Iran, and Russia would use.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for staying over time.
All right. Yeah. So I probably missed some critical hearing right now. You're going to be like, I'll have to get a press pass. Well, thank you all for having me, and I appreciate the quality of the questions. Sorry I went on a little long on some of them, but it's let us live in interesting times, and we are living in interesting times.
Indeed. All right. Thank you.
Nicholas Anastasio from the National Journal. With a close presidential race, what does that mean for down-ballot Democrats in the state, especially when there's competitive House seats up for grabs?
Yeah, I actually think if we take a snapshot right now, at least on the Senate races, the Democratic incumbents are running way ahead of Biden. Whether there's no path to the Democrats taking control of the House without Virginia 7 and Virginia 10. When we have, as of tonight, when we have new candidates in those, will they run ahead of the president as well? I don't know yet. But, I think they generally will, because I think, whether it's choice or other issues, again, I think so far, at least, evidence is they may be running ahead of the president because they don't have some of this, people's concerns about age or not necessarily translates into other candidates. But you'll have a great chance to test out that theory in 30 days in Virginia. We'll see how, as we get these new candidates up.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.